Thank you for joining us for Don't Get Phished, Avoid Scams and Fraud. This is our fourth webinar of the 2023-2024 academic year's Get Savvy, Grow Your Green Stuff series for the fall. So my name is Andrea Pellegrini, and I run the Student Money Management Center for the entire University of Illinois system. And I am joined today by my colleagues, Emily and Steve. Emily, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Emily Harmon, and I am a family finance educator, and I am based out of Champaign, but I cover Champaign, Ford, Iroquois, and Vermilion counties.
Thank you so much, Emily. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Steve. I work in Chicago at UIC, part of College of Business, and run a program to help entrepreneurs called the Entrepreneur Support Program. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Steve. So we just want to begin today by recognizing and acknowledging that the organizers of the Get Savvy, Grow Your Green Stuff webinar series primarily reside in Illinois and serve the state of Illinois, which includes ancestral lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasha nations. And with that in mind, we would like to do a little poll, see who is joining us today. So we move polls around, so I got to find it, but let's launch that. Okay, we want to know your approximate age. We want to know whether you're a student or employee or retired. All this information, this demographic information, really helps Emily and Abby in Illinois Extension maintain their funding. So because these are free webinars, they're statewide webinars, we repurpose them and make them available. That helps us to continue to provide services with Illinois Extension. So you can fill it out. That's much appreciated. We got about a little over half, all the way up to 80%. All right, I'll leave it open for a couple more seconds. And we're going to end the poll. All right, so it looks like we have a wide distribution of people from all kinds of walks of life. So appreciate you being here, and we value your participation in the chat. So thank you. So today we're going to talk about, obviously, scams, fraud, identity theft. We want you to understand terminology related to those things. We want to identify some ways to protect your identity, both online and in real life, because it happens in both cases. We want you to be able to recognize ways to avoid different types of fraud and scams, including AI-generated scams or imposter scams. We want to discuss how organizations use data and some of the risks of data breaches. And then we want to understand roles and responsibilities in protecting personal data. So we have another poll/quiz that we're going to try out today. And I just launched it. Who do you think is most at risk of becoming a victim of identity theft? That's our first question in this quiz that I just launched. And then which age group has the highest median losses reported to the FTC from identity theft? So this is a little bit of a thinker. All right, we got about half of people that have participated so far. You might be changing your answers based on the quiz results. This is our first time using the quiz feature instead of polls. All right, we're going to end poll and share the results. So everybody kind of answered all over the place. So let's talk about this a little bit. So it's a really common misconception or myth that older people are the biggest victims of fraud, like the most likely victims of fraud. But 43% of fraud reports made to the FTC in 2022 were from people between the ages of 20 to 29, and only 23% were between the ages of 70 and 79. However, if you were over 80, your median loss was $1,750 compared to younger folks and even the 70 to 79 year old age range. So just to keep that in mind, younger people report losing money to fraud more often than older people, but the amounts are less in most cases. Another couple statistics to just mention here. The median loss for all reports was only $650, but it can be significant, especially if you are from a low income family or you have a lot of income volatility. 1 in 5 people lost money to imposter scams. So we'll talk a little bit more about imposter scams. And surprisingly, driver's license forgeries increased by 42% in 2022. That was not on my bingo card for 2022. So that is a little bit of a surprise. And I'm going to hand it over to Steve to talk about some terms related to phishing, fraud, and identity theft.
Good. So next slide, please. Identity theft. So sometimes also known as identity identity fraud is when someone wrongfully obtains personal information and uses it for economic gain. Typically, it is a crime of opportunity. That information could be used immediately or held and used at some point in the future. And often the signs of it are hard to see, especially at the beginning. And there are various types that we will be talking about. And a big issue is not only the financial loss, but the impact to personal or business reputation. Next slide. So what can be stolen? Well, I think probably many people think about Social Security numbers and credit card numbers, but those aren't the only things. You'll see there, and we'll talk a little bit more about email credentials, types of money, and other personal information, including medical and tax information. So we often talk about the term social engineering, using deception to manipulate, to get people to share information that they will use for fraudulent purposes. So some specific types. Phishing is a term that we often use as a catch-all for different types of getting that information. Specifically, sometimes we hear about spear phishing or whaling, which is when a specific person is targeted. An example of that might be when somebody is asked from a supervisor to do something in a hurry. Say, the common thing that is often talked about is that supposedly your supervisor will say that they need to pay a bill very quickly and ask you to go buy a gift card for them. And then another type of social engineering is farming, which is typically when a website is or information to a website is set up in such a way that instead of going to your bank or to your, say, Facebook account, you go to a page that is run by a scammer. It looks very similar. Sometimes it's very difficult. And the goal is to get you to enter your credentials. And then they harvest those credentials, but you're not actually getting to the source of information that you want. So you're giving your bank login information to somebody who's going to use that maliciously. Google has provided a phishing quiz, and I would encourage you to take a few minutes over the next couple of days to go through the quiz and see what you can learn and ways to spot different types of social engineering. So spam is often used as a catch-all phrase, and there are lots of different things that can be involved in spam. Phishing emails, some are targeted, some are more broad. Advertisements, we often call those spam. Sometimes those are, sometimes those aren't. I was thinking about how this applies in my life, and I'm an adult fan of Legos, and I realized that when I get an email from Lego, I would never consider that a spam, but I was thinking about some other things, and maybe some political things that I get, I do consider spam. So sometimes this refers to what you believe it is, and there's also unsolicited messages. The FTC has put together a list of the 10 most common fraud categories in, I believe that was last year. Of course, these change a little bit, but certainly these are things to be on the lookout for. Some of them are targeted towards specific age groups or to people in certain circumstances. And so it's important to just be aware of the different types of fraud that might be happening. We're going to look at imposter scams on our next slide. So there are various types of imposter scams, social engineering attempts to get you to do something. Some of these are easier to identify because you go, well, that doesn't relate to me, like a notice from the IRS saying you owe tax money. Maybe you know you don't. So you ignore that. But others of these have more resonate with different people, and they're sending out loads of these hoping that somebody will consider that it resonates with them. One of the things that is probably very common is the family emergency or the grandkid scam, when often targeted towards older people, when they'll get notification that one of their grandchildren has had a bad event, either been robbed or an accident, and needs money sent to them right away. And sometimes those are done with the knowledge of where someone is in the world, and so sometimes those are more under the category of the the spear phishing or the whaling, or sometimes those are just broadly put out, and so we need to be aware of these different things. We actually had a coworker who had an event of this, something that was somewhat new, but is something to be watching out, where someone professionally tried to become or to fake people out. So if you've been on one of our webinars before, you might have heard from Kathleen Swedler. She was teaching a massive open online course on Coursera, and found out a few weeks after that had started that a con artist had targeted her students. They were using her image and her name. They were trying to lure people to connect with them on WhatsApp, and then to offer to sell them investment advice based on the fact that Kathy was the knowledgeable instructor. So it's important to keep aware of, do things sound a little suspicious? What might that be? AI is making a change in this world. So in the chat, have any of you heard of AI being used for scams? Anybody heard of AI being used for scams?
We know that AI is really new. Oh, everyone's answering now.
Yep. Okay. So someone said to make text sound better. So actually that is, we'll talk about that in just a second, but yep. Okay. Some people have, some people haven't. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide here. So AI allows scammers to do things more effectively. And so imposter scams are easier to do. It's easier to create fake online reviews, to give maybe modified advice to specifically push you to a specific type of investment. So some specific examples of how AI has been used is, yes, voice can be modified. I heard a couple weeks ago someone who was talking about some business topics, saying that they were able to translate some teaching that they were doing into another language and have it sound like them. But certainly that could be used to also impersonate somebody. And we used to always warn people that if you got an email that had a lot of spelling mistakes or grammar mistakes, that was a good sign that it might be a spam. And now with AI, AI can help those people to avoid some of those mistakes and the glaring misspellings and grammatical mistakes that would mislead people. So another type of phishing or spam or scam that we should be aware of is malware. And so malware is just a term for software that's been designed to disrupt, damage, or gain unauthorized access. And some of us are aware that this happens on an ongoing basis, but it's actually the door to a number of things. The most common one would be ransomware. And so ransomware is where someone sends some kind of a malicious code to your computer and basically sends you a notice that if you don't pay them, they will encrypt all of your data and make your information useless. These types of activities have been targeting schools and hospitals, and including businesses and government agencies, any type of agency that has a lot of data, and even occasionally individuals who just have data who are able, or they're able to get their information in. And so this type of activity often leads to data breaches. So a data breach is when data is released without someone's authorization. Some things that cause this are typically weak passwords, stolen credentials, compromised equipment. There can be different things. And ultimately, often the data breach is looking for corporate and business information, personal information, including healthcare, and other types of data that can be used to steal and cause corruption. We've got a slide here with some notable data breaches in the past few years. Certainly, this is not all of them, and these type of events continue to happen. If you are an employee, you want to be careful to protect your employer, and be careful that if your information is in one of those, that you are aware and making wise decisions about that. There's a specific data breach that we wanted to highlight, or a vulnerability. The event that started this was not necessarily a data breach. It was a vulnerability in software, but this affects especially people in the state of Illinois and those affiliated with the university. But lots of people throughout the country have been affected by this. And this was exposed a number of months ago, and they continue to discover it had to do with sharing data between computers. The actual process was normal. It was an attempt to move information in a secure way, but there were some flaws in the data that some criminals were able to exploit and use to release data. I was recently on a training by the SBA, the Small Business Administration, and I heard a quote that I thought was relevant and is very important, especially for people who have data. You're not too small to get hacked. You're too small to make the news. And in my work working with entrepreneurs, but I know even just with students and others, it's not that you're too small. It's just that if something happens, you won't be it won't be told about you on the nightly news, but it can have a serious impact. And it's very important that you do what you can to protect your data. And if you have data for other people, that you protect it. We often think that the Social Security number is one of the most important things. But one of the things that has been reported in the media is that actually credentials for different accounts have more value. So there was a recent post that suggested that criminals will pay $80 for a Gmail account and password information, $65 for Facebook, and here are some other prices here, because they can use that information then to get to more data and cause more havoc. There is a website that I would encourage you to look at and review some information. Have I been pwned? And you can do a search for your email address to see if it was in a data breach. Now, the reality is probably most of our emails, unless they're recently created, have been in a breach at some point. So we want to continue to use good cybersecurity countermeasures.
Now, I get the privilege to talk about identity to identify potential scams and fraud. So let's go ahead and get into it. So I want to pose a question to y'all. So what are some red flags that you have when you think you've encountered a spam? What signals your senses to be like, maybe this looks like a scam? So if you want to put that in the chat, or you don't have to, you can just think about it if you like. A call from a company I've never heard before. Yes. Unreasonable dollar amounts. Maybe an email address you don't know. Yeah. And maybe they're trying to indicate something to you, and that's just weird. Yeah. I always check the email addresses. That's great. So you can keep putting those in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and keep moving forward. But some additional red flags to look for, besides the ones that we are putting in the chat, because of course they're great. Some additional red flags could be that tried and true. If it sounds too good to be true, then by golly, it's probably isn't going to be true. And then if you're being threatened or intimidated into something, so that could look like being pressured to act quickly. That could be those threatening or harsh tones, and then those negative consequences if you don't take it. Just like Steve was just talking about, if your supervisor is telling you that he needs, or that they need to pay a bill quickly, and they're telling you to buy a gift card and you need to do it fast. Maybe that's an act of possible identity theft. And then being asked for personal information. Genuine companies will not ask you to send them details over text or email, and then requiring unusual payment methods, slight misspellings or usernames, or emails or URLs. And like Steve was saying, maybe sometimes AI can pick that up and try to deter from that. But I just saw it a couple weeks ago. Someone was trying to, I just got some spam in my email, and I noticed it because there was a misspelling in the email. And then communication methods that's out of the ordinary. So that's like what we were saying in the chat. If someone's emailing you and you don't know that person's email, maybe that's spam. And then IRS scams. These are so prevalent. So unfortunately, scammers try to get people in the mode of claiming to be the IRS when they really aren't. IRS scams can target tax professionals, payroll and human resource professionals, and the individual taxpayer. So we're going to Abby just put a link in the chat of where you can report certain IRS claims to. That's a really important tool. So you can potentially help other people in the future if they encounter those things too. And then also pro tips for everyone. The IRS will only contact you by sending letters most of the time. And also file your taxes early so you can, one, be ahead of the game and just get it done. Two, you can catch any fraudulent activity on your taxes. And then if you file early, you can also deter the fact that someone else doesn't try to file under your name. So getting it done early has a lot of positives, but you can also try to prevent some fraudulent activity as well. And then safeguarding your social security number. It's a good thing to question or be skeptical of someone asking for your social security number, because we talked about how that's such an important number, and that little card is super important. This 10-digit number can affect a lot of important information, and it's also a pain to even try to get a new social security number or to deal with that stuff. I personally had an experience with this a couple weeks ago. I was trying to get life insurance for my daughter. They asked for her social security number, and I questioned it. I asked those questions like you see on the screen. Why do you need it? How will it be used? And how do you protect it? And I ultimately ended up saying, no, I didn't want to give my social security number because they didn't need it. I deemed they didn't need it. So I safeguarded her social security number by not providing it. So that's also another pro tip too. You don't have to provide it. Certain situations may dictate it, but you don't always have to provide a social security number if somebody asks you for that. And then on our next slide, this is a non-exhaustive list of things that you can do to safeguard yourself from scams or identity theft. So you can keep those important papers, both physically and digitally, because we still have physical papers. Everything's not always online. You can keep those things in a locked filing cabinet or a password protected computer or like a password protected filing system. And then be careful with your mail. Destroy pieces of mail that have sensitive information. So how are we going to destroy that mail? One of those options could be shredding sensitive documents. That could be where you super tear it up if you don't have a paper shredder, Or if you want to spend the money and get the paper shredder, that's also a good thing too. Don't overshare on social media. Less is more. I had a personal experience, this was a long time ago, where somebody posted a picture of a check that they got with, they didn't blur any information out, so I could see what the bank was, what the person who sent them the check, the amount of money, all the things that you see on a check. So I've seen it done. Don't do it. Don't overshare on social media. And then locking your devices, making sure your things that are important to you are password protected. And even if you're out on campus, let's say, and you have to get up to go get a water or throw something away, lock your device. You don't want anybody getting on there. And then making sure, doing your due diligence, read those privacy policies for anything you have. Explore how companies that you have accounts with are protecting your information. And then also limit what you carry, so less is more. Like, don't carry your social security number or social security card on your wallet, in your purse, on your person. Lock it up, leave it at home. And then when you have medicine bottles that have those RX labels on them, Sharpie them out so nobody can see them, or try to scrape it off and shred it. But that's protecting your information. And then also, you can, if you have, when you go to the store or in your email, you get a pre-approval offer for a credit card. You can opt out of those. There's going to be a link in the chat that we'll put in there that you can do that. But you can opt out of that information. And then lastly, public Wi-Fi is public Wi-Fi. So make sure you're not getting on things that you want to keep safe to you on public Wi-Fi. And then going into passwords. So on the screen here, there's just some general tips of creating and maintaining passwords. And then Andrea is going to talk a little bit more about passwords and password managers. But don't share your passwords or pins. Use unique passwords or passphrases. Don't reuse the same password. I know that's hard. I am sometimes guilty of it. I will say it. But don't do it. Consider using a password manager, and don't share your answers to your security questions. And then the FTC, they actually say that a longer password is better, right? They say that a good safe password is at least 12 characters. Sometimes you can have accounts or somewhere that they have a minimum of 18 characters or whatever that is, but FTC says 12. You may encounter people wanting more. But those characters can be a mix of letters, both uppercase and lowercase, numbers, symbols, and all of that fun stuff. And so now I'm going to pass it on to Andrea to talk more about passwords and get into it.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm going to go a little step beyond passwords and talk about multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. This is an account access process that provides a little more protection than a password alone, since it requires a secondary step to verify and grant access. Most of us are probably familiar with this by now because it's required for getting into a lot of stuff for the university, getting into our financial institution accounts. But typically this works with a login attempt, then a verification message is sent either by phone, app, token, or some other device connected to the internet. Then it prompts you to grant or deny access. So that can be a little bit much for some people, but the other thing that we wanted to talk about is password managers, which Emily talked briefly about. So in the past, the best practice for passwords might have been to create a password that's hard to guess, that has both letters and numbers, and don't write it down. Now we have so many things to remember that it's in your best interest to use a secure password manager where you can save different passwords for all your different accounts. So they allow you to remember ideally one very long, complicated password or passphrase, and then it can save your login information for all the different sites and apps that you have. So if you use one password for everything, all of your different accounts, then if one of your accounts gets compromised, the rest can easily get compromised too. So if you use different passwords for everything, then it lowers your risk of having all your accounts compromised. Password managers can also be used on multiple devices and syncs the information for your account. So you can just click a few buttons to log in on your laptop versus on your phone for the same website. So some password managers are integrated into the systems that we use, like Google has a password manager if you use Chrome. Apple has iCloud Keychain. If you use multiple types of services and devices, having a third-party password manager might function better for you. But we did a whole podcast episode just on password managers, so you can listen to that later if you want to learn more about password managers if you're on the fence. So something new that's coming around is something called a passkey. It is a personalized fast identity online or FIDO credential that's similar to a biometric scan of like your face or a fingerprint, and it lives on your device. So they are nearly impossible to crack, unlike passwords. They're stored on your device, not in the cloud like passwords or passphrases. So they can't be hacked or guessed because they're on your device. You do have to set up passkeys individually on each device you want to give access to. We just are kind of mentioning this because it's a newer type of technology that's not widely available yet, but we want you to be aware that it is something that is in our future. So the next time that we do this webinar, we might have a lot more information on passkeys, their usage, concerns, and cautions with them. But just keep in mind that that is another new technology to look for. So if anyone's ever heard of MFA bombing or multi-factor authentication fatigue attacks, they're a specific type of social engineering where repeated MFA or 2FA requests are sent until the victim authorizes the request. The attempt might be timed to be at night when you're sleepy or when you're distracted, maybe during the day when you're normally logging in a lot. So it's important to think about the context of when you're getting those alerts and if you are the one that actually initiated it. So we'll put in the chat some more information on fatigue attacks. They're usually part of a whaling or spear phishing attempt. They're usually looking for a specific person to try to get access to their system, but it can happen to anybody. There are also authenticator apps. So there are many different uses for authenticator apps. They often work as part of a MFA or 2FA authentication process. The University of Illinois uses Duo for multi-factor authentication, which has an authenticator app that sends push notifications to your smart device, like a phone or tablet, whatever you have that app installed on. Authenticator apps can also be used for accessing third-party digital wallets, like what you would store cryptocurrency in, for example. So just a little bit about authenticator apps. And then encryption is a method of converting your information into a secret code that makes it harder for hackers to access. This is how ransomware works, where the bad actor locks up your data, but you don't have the key. You can use encryption to lock up your data as well to prevent other people from accessing it. It's used in a lot of different ways, and there are many types and levels of encryption. So you might use encryption on financial data that's stored on your computer, things like your cell phone, computer, portable hard drive, tablet, etc., whenever encryption is offered. You might encrypt your entire hard drive on your computer. Sometimes on portable hard drives, the encryption software comes preloaded and asks you during setup if you want to enable it. There was a software upgrade made in our department a while back that wouldn't let you see anything on a portable hard drive unless that hard drive was encrypted for the protection of any data you would store on it. You can also encrypt files before you even share them and then send the password separately through a secure communication channel for the recipient to open later or just for yourself. So encryption has a lot of different utilities, which is why we want to talk about it as a tool for combating identity theft, phishing, fraud, scams, any potential data security issues. So another thing to consider, another tool, is a virtual private network, or VPN. So this is an encrypted connection over the internet from a single device to a private network, which hides your internet traffic and provides a little bit of anonymity to all of your activities while you're using it. So if you use public Wi-Fi a lot, having a VPN installed on your device would help protect your activities, so people aren't scraping your data from being on that public Wi-Fi. It's often used in business and government to allow employees to remotely access a company's internal network securely. We have one for each of the universities as well. And then the National Security Agency, NSA, strongly encourages the use of either a corporate provided or personal VPN on public Wi-Fi for the reasons that I mentioned before. So keep all those things in mind.
Yeah, Andrea, I would like to interject. We had a question in the Q&A.
Oh, yeah.
And you addressed all of it. But one part was, does a VPN have a cost associated with it?
Yes. So one of the reasons why the NSA it suggested corporate provided VPNs is from a business perspective, right? It makes sense if you are having remote employees that you provide a VPN to them. And so you might be able to have access to a VPN through work or through school. Like all of our students have access to a VPN. You just have to download it from their web store. At least in Urbana, Chicago's probably the same way, and Springfield's probably the same way. But if you don't have access through work or through school, there's a lot of VPN options out there. And so you can compare the features of the VPN, what the costs are. My partner actually pays for a VPN for us at home, so we have access to it even if one of us would lose access through our employer, right? And we don't do work stuff on our personal devices, so we have a separate VPN for the personal traffic, right? So hopefully that provides a little insight. It does have a cost depending on what you can access it through. And it varies, the costs vary depending on what you're going to use. Does that help, Emily? I'm going to assume
yes,
I did
thank
perfect.
you.
Okay, great. So a few other ways to combat malware is to install antivirus software and anti-malware software on all your devices. And you can also, this includes both Mac and Windows. A lot of people assume that Apple devices can't get malware, but they can. So it's good to invest in a good antivirus or anti-malware software for all of your devices. You want to back up your data regularly. You can either use protected cloud backups or physical storage if it's encrypted. That way, even if you're a victim of ransomware, having those regular backups, you can still have access to your information. You just got to do it regularly. Some businesses will actually back up all of their data every single day to prevent this kind of huge loss. Because even if you're a victim of ransomware, if you pay however much the ransom is, it could be that they don't actually deactivate or decrypt all the data that they have encrypted in the ransomware. So, all right. So in continuing with secure storage, in a physical environment, you want to lock up your purse or wallet or any of your items while at work or at school. You want to lock your computer when unattended. This does not mean that you can leave your laptop unattended at the library or at Starbucks without it getting stolen if you just lock it. So be careful where you are, obviously. You can use a locking file cabinet for important documents, lock your phone, lock any of your devices. It's also just a side note, biometric data like your face or your fingerprint is not legally protected in certain situations. And in some state it's not legally protected. but Illinois has some protections for biometric data. So just keep that in mind. And like Emily mentioned earlier, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You don't want to be pressured to take action immediately on any opportunities. You want to research the organization or the phenomena that you're working with. You want to be skeptical of reviews. There's a lot of fake reviews out there. Comparison shopping is a good way to avoid issues with fake reviews or fake items. And it's always good to ask an expert if you're confused on something. You also want to be cautious about sharing your email address. Since we're talking a lot about data security, we just wanted to mention here that even though the GDPR law that went into effect in Europe several years ago provides more protections for consumers regarding their online activity, you can still be tracked by how you share your email address. So for example, advertisers can link information to your email address to better target ads to you. But that information could also be used in a malicious way in social engineering attempts. So you can limit some of this ad targeting by creating multiple email addresses, using email masking tools, which many phone operating systems are providing now, or opting out of ad targeting altogether. So those are just a few ways that you can be more data conscious about your email. All right, so we want you to continue learning. So how we navigate cybersecurity risks, identity theft, and fraud continues to evolve alongside technology. So it's always a good idea to seek out additional sources. We have some additional sources here. We'll also include those in the follow-up email that we send along with this recording. So if you don't capture them, that's okay. We will send you a follow-up. All right, so let's talk about what to do if you end up a victim of identity theft, phishing, fraud. So a few warning signs that you're a victim include mistakes on accounts and or your credit reports, which is why it's a good idea to check your credit reports regularly. Maybe regular bills go missing that you anticipate getting. Maybe you get a notice from the IRS through the United States Postal System. This is not necessarily a scam. It could be that you were a victim of identity theft and the IRS is auditing you or letting you know that something is amiss. Calls or mail about accounts in your minor child's name. So Emily mentioned how she is protecting her daughter's social security number by not providing it. You can also do other things to protect your minor child's name, which we'll talk about later, like credit freezes. You might get calls from debt collectors or for debts that you don't have or for vendors that you've never done business with. And you might see alerts about unusual activity from your particular financial institution. It could be a situation where you don't see any of these signs because the con artist is redirecting any messages to another email address or another physical mailing address, not one associated with you. So if you do end up a victim of fraud, you want to act fast to limit any damages. This means you want to record everything related to the issue and keep it in a safe place. You want to place an initial fraud alert on your credit reports. Once one of the credit bureaus processes the alert, they should notify the other two bureaus to do the same thing. You'll also want to order your credit reports. Identity theft victims get them for free, so you should not have to pay for them if you are a victim of identity theft. And you want to create an identity theft report, which gives you rights that help you recover a little more quickly. You can file a complaint with the FTC as well as file a police report. So I mentioned credit freezes. There are also fraud alerts. So these are two different types of tools that you can use to either after being a victim of identity theft or to try to prevent becoming a victim of identity theft. So a fraud alert requires that businesses verify your identity before issuing any new credit. If you have one of these on your credit report, it can be placed for 90 days according to the FACTA law, the FACT Act. And an extended fraud alert can last 7 years, but they're only available to identity theft victims. Credit freezes are available to everyone, and it stops all access to your credit report until you lift the freeze. So some people will put a credit freeze on their minor child's name, so that there's no activity happening until they are able to do that for themselves. And then a freeze, like I said earlier, is available to anyone, whether or not they've been a victim of identity theft, and it stays there until you remove it. So it's not like the extended fraud alert, which expires after 7 years. All right, so I think we're doing okay on time. All right, so an identity theft report requires the FTC identity theft affidavit be completed, a police report be made, and that is your identity theft report. So those two pieces together make that up. After you've made an identity theft report, you'll want to get copies of documents related to your identity theft. You want to get fraudulent information removed or blocked from your credit reports. You'll want to dispute fraudulent or inaccurate information on your credit reports. And this will also allow you to stop a debt collector from contacting you as well. So I mentioned the FACT Act earlier, which was signed into law in 2003. This is what allows you to have a free copy of each of your credit reports annually, and this is legally allowed through the FACTA Act. It also gives you the right to place a fraud alert on your credit report for 90 days after an identity theft is confirmed, and you can request an extension after the confirmation of the identity theft. And like we said earlier, the FACT Act requires businesses to contact you if there's a fraud alert on your report before they extend credit at all. All right, so we mentioned that the FACT Act allows you access to a free credit report from each of the bureaus once every 12 months. That's your legal entitlement. However, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion recently started offering weekly access for consumers permanently. So this started in early pandemic, right, 2020, and they decided to just continue offering that to consumers. So they could change this at any point, but it's a really valuable tool that you have access to now. So a few things to keep in mind as we're summarizing this information. You can have both behaviors you can implement and tools you can use to limit any potential risks of identity theft, fraud, data breaches. So you want to limit sharing. Emily mentioned the issues about social media sharing and what she's witnessed. I've witnessed some wild social media sharing as well. You want to limit what you share online. You want to lock up any personal information or financial information when you're not around it, especially in public spaces like at work, at the gym, at school. You want to use strong passwords or passphrases or pins or passkey if that's available to you and you want to start using it. Being skeptical of not just potentially fake reviews online, but also any phishing attempts, emails, phone calls that sound strange or doesn't make sense with your financial activity on a normal day. You want to shred documents with sensitive information. I put in the chat while we were talking about this earlier, but micro shred and cross cut shredders are going to be the best options if you choose to buy a shredder. That makes it a lot harder for scam artists to piece together your information. You want to monitor accounts and credit reports, and obviously act quickly if you notice an issue. Some of the tools that we talked about was MFA or 2FA, VPNs, antivirus and anti-malware, backup processes and storage for your virtual data, microcut or cross-cut paper shredders, which I just mentioned, and password managers and passkeys, which we talked about before. And then Have I Been Pwned is a very valuable website to identify what data breaches your email address might have been part of. I do believe they also have phone numbers in there now, but I'm not sure if that they've maintained that. So our next webinar is on December 6th, called Your Financial Tool Chest. It will be just in a few weeks. It feels like about a month. So if you've not registered for that, go ahead and do so. You can also watch our previous webinars on YouTube, and we will put this webinar recording, once it's captioned appropriately, on our YouTube channel. And you can stay in contact with all of the collaborators for the Get Savvy Grow Your Green Stuff webinar series. And we'll stick around for questions. So did I miss any other ones, Emily?
I don't think so. I'm looking in the chat and the Q&A.
All right. So this is a great opportunity. If there's anything we didn't address or something that you wish we would have addressed, you can put it in the chat. But if you have somewhere to go, or you don't have anything in mind right now, you can always ask questions later by emailing studentmoney@uillinois.edu, and we can do our best to get you an answer. Steve, do you have anything to add that I might have missed?
Oh no, I saw Steve just said many credit unions offer free shredding events a couple times each year. I totally forgot about that. Yeah,
That
that's
is
a good
true.
resource if you don't have a shredder.
I believe that there's a few financial institutions in Champaign-Urbana that do it during Money Smart Week in April.
Yeah.
There's a question about explaining fatigue attack.
Okay.
So one of the things that will happen is that scammers will somehow figure out how to get into your account, as far as initiating the say, like the system that the University of Illinois system uses, Duo, to send you repeated things from Duo. And there was an incident here in Chicago a couple months ago where they finally found out that the person who had been attacked, finally, after getting 10, 20, 30 of these requests to authorize their account, finally like, okay, I'm just going to do it to get them to stop, and didn't realize that she was giving them access to her account, and which that they could do more phishing.
Yeah, so usually I had a colleague that also had a fatigue attack on her, and she just denied the requests. And when she contacted IT, they just told her to change her password. So it's likely that someone figures out the password but can't get through because there's 2FA, and so they just continue to submit the password and until a fatigued individual says yes to allowing access. Any other questions? That's a good question. All right, we went over. Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to throw one other thing out to think about. Somebody mentioned earlier checking the return address that an email comes from. It's very important that you get in the habit of doing that. and checking where the periods are and what else is included in that. So sometimes people will say, spoof an address, make it look like it's something else, and it will look sort of credible and sort of right until then they'll add a whole bunch of other characters or words on it. So you want to get in the habit of reading the entire address and seeing what the full domain is, so it doesn't start just with a word that sounds right and then end with something else. And also, if someone sends you a link, always be cautious, but looking at what the actual address is in the link, and again, making sure that it is the domain that you expect it to be and that it's not got additional characters or additional words in it.
Absolutely, Steve. I agree. And one thing that we didn't talk about with AI was deep fakes, which are getting a lot better. For those of you that don't know about deep fakes, they are artificially created, typically videos that are made to look like someone else. For example, my husband found an app where he was able to load like a picture of his aunt, and it turned it into a video where she was wrapping something from iced tea, and it looked like her.
Oh, wow.
So with that type of technology, even things that are video based can easily be created and used to manipulate people. But we could probably talk about all these different things all day long. We tried to cram as much information about identity theft and fraud and what you can do to protect yourself in an hour. And hopefully we gave you some tools to be successful in preventing fraud or dealing with being a victim of fraud in the future. All right, if we don't have any other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up today's webinar, but thank you again for joining us and have a fabulous rest of your afternoon.